Welcome back, students. What you see here, you have a lipid bilayer with the integral protein. You have the ions distributed on either side of the membrane. You can see a positive side here and a negative sign here. The membrane is positive on one side and negative on one side. So, today the topic is on membrane potentials. Objectives of the session. At the end of the session, the student should be able to define membrane potentials, list the different types of membrane potentials, define what is resting membrane potential and graded potential, and describe the patch clamp technique. This comes under the Physiology Competency 1.8. Physiology Competency 1.8. So, you have the cell membrane. The ionic composition on the extracellular side and the intracellular side is not the same. You have the predominant cation sodium and anion chloride in the extracellular compartment with the predominant cation potassium, and you have lot of intracellular negatively charged protein in the intracellular compartment. The tendency of sodium ion is always to diffuse from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment. The potassium ions have the tendency to diffuse from the intracellular to the extracellular compartment. Why the cell has more negative ions inside? What is the reason for that? It is because of the ratio of negative to positive ions which is greater inside the cell than outside. The negative ions are more inside the cell than outside. Why is there an unequal distribution of ions? It is because of selective permeability and molecular weight. It is because of selective permeability. What decides the selective permeability? The molecular weight of the substance and size of the ions, the type of molecules, all these will decide the selective permeability. One is the presence of channels. Channels, the size. What decides the size? The size is decided by the molecular weight. Second is whether it is the ions are hydrated or not. For example, the size of sodium ion is smaller than that of potassium ion, but the hydrated sodium ion is larger than the hydrated potassium ion. The presence of channel. If the membrane has more leaky channel for sodium at any given time, then the sodium permeability is more. If the membrane has more leaky channel for potassium, then the potassium permeability will be more. The unequal distribution of ion is not only decided by selective permeability, but Gibbs-Donen equilibrium also plays a very important role. So, the definition for membrane potential is the electrical potential difference that exists across the cell membrane of all living cell is called the membrane potential. Every living cell has a membrane potential. When a stimulus is going to alter this membrane potential, you call the cell is excitable. What are all the types of membrane potential? You have resting membrane potential, action potential, and graded potential. So, you have a cell. Normally, the interior of the cell is having more of negative charges. On the external surface, you have more positive charges. The potassium concentration is more inside. It is around 140 milliequivalents, and the potassium concentration in the extracellular compartment is less. We assume that the cell is permeable to potassium alone. What favors the movement of potassium and in which direction the movement will occur? The concentration gradient will favor the movement of potassium from the intracellular to the extracellular compartment. But the intracellular potential is negative. Inside the cell, there are more negative charges which will try to hold back the potassium ions. So, the potassium is trying to move based on the concentration gradient from the intracellular to the extracellular compartment. The electrical gradient is going to oppose this movement. You know something called as Nernst equilibrium potential. When potassium ion is moving from intracellular compartment to the extracellular, when potassium ion is moving from intracellular to extracellular compartment, there is a current flow. You call that as diffusion potential. This is the diffusion potential for potassium ion. So, what is the Nernst equilibrium potential? We all know it is plus 61 log of concentration of that particular ion inside and outside. Here the concentration of potassium is 140 in the intracellular and 4 in the extracellular compartment. 140 by 4 will work out to 35. Log of 35 is 1.54. So, the Nernst equilibrium potential for potassium ion is minus 94. The electrical potential at which the concentration gradient opposes the electrical gradient and there is no net movement of potassium ion is the Nernst equilibrium potential for potassium. It is minus 94 millivolt. Coming to sodium. The sodium concentration is less inside. It is 14 milliequivalents per liter. It is more in the extracellular compartment. It is 142 milliequivalents per liter. Now, the diffusion potential for sodium is, sodium tries to move from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment. The concentration gradient favors this movement. You have negativity inside. So, the negative intracellular potential will also favor the movement of sodium from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment. So, the diffusion potential for sodium is the ratio between 142 and 14. The equilibrium potential will be again the same formula. Here the concentration inside is 14 and outside is 142. It works out to log of 0.1. Log of 0.1 is 1. So, the equilibrium potential for sodium ion is just 61 plus it is plus 61 millivolt. The equilibrium potential for potassium was minus 94 because the positive ion was moving from the intracellular to the extracellular compartment. Here for sodium it is plus 61 because a positive ion is moving from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment.